Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're tackling a question that's been swirling around a lot lately. Have we, as like a society, a species, hit a wall when it comes to innovation? It seems crazy to think that back in 1961, JFK promised we'd put a man on the moon
Right.
by the end of the decade, and we did.
It's amazing.
The 20th century was a rocket ship of progress. Airplanes, antibiotics, computers, the list goes on.
For sure.
But has that pace slowed down?
It's a question that a lot of people are asking. There's some people who argue that we're in the midst of what they call a great stagnation.
Yeah.
And, there's data that kind of paints a concerning picture. Wage growth and income inequality are pretty stark indicators. And even something like the impact of new scientific publications seems to be waning.
Oh, wow. So it's not just a feeling, there are actual metrics that are pointing to a slowdown? Yeah.
Exactly. One that economists often point to is total factor productivity, or TFP for short.
Right.
And it's kind of like, imagine a recipe, right? You put in your ingredients, your labor capital resources, and out comes your economic pie. TFP is essentially measuring how efficiently you're baking that pie.
Okay.
And since the 1970s, the growth of that efficiency has been, well, not so tasty.
Okay, so our economic baking skills have taken a hit. But why should I, the listener, care about something as abstract as TFP?
Because it directly impacts your standard of living.
Yeah.
So technological advancement is a key ingredient in that TFP recipe. So slower TFP growth could mean slower wage growth, fewer groundbreaking innovations that, transform our lives, and potentially, a future that's less bright than those mid-century futurists envisioned.
Mm-hmm.
All those predictions of personal robots, Mars colonies, and three-day work weeks.
Right. Yeah, instead of robots doing our chores, many of us are just working longer hours. Is this low-hanging fruit argument part of the explanation, the idea that we've already made all the big, easy discoveries, and so now innovation is tougher?
That's one perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one that's been popularized by economists like Tyler Cowen and Robert Gordon.
Right.
But our guide for this deep dive, economist Bern Hobart, and his book, Boom, Bubbles and the End of Stagnation, kind of takes a different approach.
Okay.
He doesn't just look at economic factors,
Yeah.
but also cultural and even spiritual ones.
Interesting. So it's not just about the numbers, it's about how we think and what we value as a society.
Precisely. Hobart argues that a core driver of this stagnation is a growing aversion to risk. Just think about it. Are we as a society as willing to take chances as we were, say, 50 years ago?
That's a good question for sure. What would be some examples of this risk aversion beyond the obvious financial caution?
So look at academia.
Huh.
There's a lot of pressure to publish safe, incremental research that, gets you grants and tenure, rather than, pursuing these bold, potentially groundbreaking ideas that, may not pan out. Or even think about pop culture. You know how many reboots and sequels are we just bombarded with compared to truly original stories?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like playing it safe has become the default in many areas of life. But is this risk aversion really a new thing? Or are we just more aware of it now?
Well, Hobart argues that there are three major forces that have intensified this trend. The first one is demographic change. An aging population, declining birth rates, these naturally lead to a more cautious society that's less inclined to embrace the unknown. And there's even some research suggesting...
Hold on, you're about to go down a testosterone rabbit hole.
Well, Hobart does get into that a bit, but, let's stick to the broader point here. So the second force is what he calls the tyranny of bureaucratization. Ever-expanding regulations, the obsession with metrics, and eliminating any semblance of risk, these stifle creativity and experimentation.
Yeah, it's like we've become so obsessed with avoiding failure that we've forgotten how to embrace the possibility of truly remarkable success. It reminds me of something I read recently about how even risk management, which is supposed to, help us progress, can backfire when taken to an extreme.
Exactly. It becomes risk aversion. And the third force is something that you alluded to earlier, hyper-financialization.
All right, break this down for me. It sounds like something only economists understand.
Essentially, it's the increasing dominance of financial markets over the real economy. So after the Bretton Woods system collapsed in the 1970s, the focus shifted to minimizing volatility and maximizing short-term profits, even if it meant accumulating mountains of debt and neglecting the long-term investments that drive, real tangible progress.
So instead of focusing on building things, innovating, creating real value, we're playing financial games that might look good on paper but don't actually translate to a better future for most people.
Precisely. And this hyperfinancialization feeds back into that risk aversion that we talked about.
Mm.
And it discourages those, bold bets that true innovation often requires. So it becomes a vicious cycle.
So we have these three powerful forces: aging demographics, bureaucratic overreach, a financial system that's obsessed with short-term gains, and they're all converging to create a culture that's increasingly wary of risk. But how does this play out beyond just the economic sphere? How does it impact our culture, our creativity, even our scientific progress?
Well, that's where things get really fascinating.
Hmm.
Because this risk aversion that we talked about, it kind of seeps into everything. Our art, our music, even our scientific endeavors. Think
Yeah.
about it. How often do you see truly groundbreaking original ideas in, pop culture these days?
Yeah, it does feel like we're stuck in a loop of reboots and sequels. Like we're afraid to venture into uncharted territory, both creatively and intellectually.
And it's not just, a harmless trend.
Hmm.
It points to, I think, a deeper societal shift, this kind of homogenization of culture, a decline in individuality. And this is all intensified, of course, by social media and our always-on, hyper-connected world. It's like we're losing our ability to think differently, to challenge the status quo.
It reminds me of something the philosopher Martin Heidegger warned about. Technology leading to a flattening of experience, a loss of connection to the world and to ourselves. His words were, "Is not this merging of everything into distancelessness more unearthly than everything bursting apart?"
Oh.
And it's almost eerie how relevant that feels in today's world.
Heidegger's critique, I think, is more pertinent than ever. He saw technology as this double-edged sword, with the potential to both illuminate and obscure, to connect and to isolate. And this cultural stagnation that we're talking about is mirrored, I think, in the world of science as well. Hobart identifies a similar trifecta at play: risk aversion in research institutions, the bureaucratization of science, and hyperspecialization.
So it's not just that we're lacking these, groundbreaking discoveries. It's that the very system of scientific inquiry has become less conducive to them.
Exactly. Researchers are often incentivized to pursue safe, incremental research, the kind that gets published in prestigious journals and secures grants. It's a far cry from the days when scientists were willing to risk their reputations, even their careers, to pursue these radical ideas that challenge the prevailing paradigms.
Right, and this bureaucratization that you mentioned, I imagine that adds another layer of difficulty.
It absolutely does. Instead of spending their time in a lab or in the field, researchers are, bogged down with grant applications, bureaucratic hurdles, endless paperwork. It's a system that often rewards conformity over creativity.
And then there's this hyper-specialization, right? Everyone digging deeper and deeper into increasingly narrow fields. And while that can lead to breakthroughs, it also risks missing the big picture, those connections that spark truly transformative discoveries.
Exactly. It's like we're so fixated on the individual trees that we're losing sight of the forest. But, is this great stagnation an inevitable outcome? Is there no way to break free from this, risk-averse, innovation-stifling rut?
Well, Hubert does offer a glimmer of hope, and it might seem counterintuitive at first. He argues that the answer lies in something we usually associate with economic instability: bubbles.
Ah, yes. But not just any bubbles. Hobart is careful to distinguish between what he calls bad bubbles, which are the kind that lead to financial crashes and economic hardship, and good bubbles, which he argues can actually be powerful engines of progress.
Wait, good bubbles. I'm having trouble wrapping my head around that. Aren't all bubbles inherently unsustainable?
That's the common perception. But Hobart makes a compelling case for the other side. He argues that good bubbles create this unique set of conditions, a confluence of enthusiasm, investment, risk-taking, that can propel us forward in ways that we wouldn't normally imagine.
So it's like this controlled burst of energy, a temporary suspension of our usual risk aversion that allows for rapid experimentation and breakthrough innovation.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, he points to some fascinating historical examples: the Manhattan Project, the Apollo program, the semiconductor industry, even fracking.
Those are some pretty diverse examples. Let's start with the Manhattan Project. That was driven by wartime urgency, right?
Absolutely. The existential threat of World War II created this sense of urgency and purpose.
Yeah.
That allowed for this massive mobilization of resources, talent, and importantly, a tolerance for risk that you wouldn't have seen in peacetime.
And it's amazing to think that something as destructive as the atomic bomb also laid the groundwork for so many technologies that benefit society today. And it's interesting that the project's leader, Oppenheimer, was chosen despite not being a Nobel laureate, which was controversial at the time. It shows they were really willing to think outside the box.
Exactly. It highlights the unconventional nature of the project,
Yeah.
their willingness to break the mold.
Yeah.
And speaking of ambitious goals, The Apollo program is another prime example of a good bubble in action.
Yeah, the goal of landing a man on the moon within a decade, that was audacious to say the least. It must have fostered an incredible culture of risk-taking and innovation at NASA.
Absolutely. The Apollo program not only achieved its ambitious goal, but it also spurred countless technological advancements, from material science and computing to communication and navigation systems. And, even amidst all the excitement, public support for the program fluctuated, reflecting, I think, that typical hype cycle that we see with a lot of these really innovative endeavors.
It reminds us that even the most groundbreaking projects are going to face their share of skepticism and setbacks along the way. Now, what about the semiconductor industry? It's hard to imagine our world today without computer chips.
That's right. And their development is a testament to the power of what Hobart calls a paired bubble. The idea that innovation in one industry can create this ripple effect, sparking innovation in other complementary industries.
So you have Moore's law, the observation that the number of transistors on a chip doubles approximately every 2 years. And that's driving this relentless progress in chip manufacturing. And then you have software developers creating ever more sophisticated applications that demand even more powerful chips. It becomes this self-reinforcing cycle of progress.
Precisely. It's a beautiful illustration of how two industries can feed off each other's advancements and create this, exponential growth curve. And this dynamic is still unfolding today. Just look at the incredible progress in artificial intelligence, which is really pushing the boundaries of chip design and manufacturing. Now, fracking is, I think, a more contentious example, but it illustrates Hobart's point in a different way.
Yeah, it's certainly been controversial due to its environmental impact, but it's also been a game changer for the energy industry.
Absolutely. Fracking challenged conventional wisdom about energy production, and it led to this boom in domestic oil and gas production in the U.S. It's a clear example of how a disruptive technology initially dismissed as, too risky or impractical can upend an entire industry.
So we have these fascinating historical examples, but what lessons can we draw from them? How can we identify and nurture these good bubbles today? How do we tell the good from the bad, so to speak?
That's the key question. And while there's no guaranteed formula, Hobart does offer some, I think, insightful clues. The first one is, looks for transformative visions, not just incremental improvements. Good bubbles are fueled by a sense of audacity, a belief that we can achieve something truly remarkable, something that fundamentally changes the game.
So it's not just about making things slightly better. It's about imagining a future that's radically different, even if it seems a bit crazy or far-fetched at first.
Exactly. It's about embracing those moonshot ideas, the ones that ignite our collective imagination and inspire us to push beyond our perceived limits. The second clue is to watch for parallel innovation in complementary industries, just like we saw with the semiconductor industry. Good bubbles often involve multiple players kind of pushing each other forward, creating this virtuous cycle of progress.
So if you see a cluster of innovations happening in related fields, that could be a sign of a good bubble in the making.
Precisely. It's like this synergy effect where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And then finally, pay attention to projects that attract a concentration of talent and capital, even if they seem risky or overvalued at the time.
So it's about recognizing that sometimes the most promising ventures are also the most unconventional, the ones that defy traditional metrics and risk assessments. So we've explored the forces behind stagnation, the potential of good bubbles, and even this link between risk-taking and progress. But there's one more thread running through Hobart's book that I find particularly intriguing, the spiritual dimension of innovation.
Ah, yes. It's a fascinating aspect that's often overlooked in discussions about, progress and technological advancement. Hobart suggests that many of the most significant breakthroughs in human history have been driven not just by practical concerns, but also by this deeper sense of meaning, a yearning for transcendence.
It's like these grand projects become almost like secular cathedrals, driven by a vision that extends beyond immediate practical concerns.
It's a powerful analogy, and it raises an important question for us today. What are the cathedrals of our time? What audacious projects are being pursued that might seem risky or even crazy now, but could have a transformative impact on the future?
Yeah, that's a great question to ponder. We've talked about, the forces hindering innovation, but where do you see glimmers of hope? Where do you see the potential for, a great acceleration, as some have called it?
But there are exciting developments happening in many fields, I think. Look at the advancements in biotechnology with the potential to cure diseases that were once thought incurable, or the progress in renewable energy paving the way for a more sustainable future. And let's not forget the ongoing exploration of space, with private companies now joining the race to push the boundaries of human exploration.
It's interesting that you mentioned private companies. Do you think they play a key role in fostering innovation? Perhaps even more so than governments these days.
It's certainly a trend worth watching. Private companies often have more flexibility to take risks, to experiment, and to move quickly. They're not bound by the same bureaucratic constraints that can sometimes stifle innovation in the public sector, but it's not in either situation. We need both visionary entrepreneurs and forward-thinking governments working together to create an environment that fosters progress.
So it's about creating a fertile ground for those good bubbles to emerge, where bold ideas can take root and flourish.
Exactly. It's about fostering a culture that embraces risk, that rewards experimentation, and that values long-term thinking over short-term gains. It's about recognizing that progress isn't always linear, that there will be setbacks and failures along the way, but that the pursuit of audacious goals is what ultimately drives us forward.
And perhaps it's also about rediscovering that sense of wonder and possibility, that belief that we can achieve great things if we dare to dream big and take bold action. We need to be looking for those projects that inspire awe, that push the boundaries of what's possible, and challenge us to imagine a future that's radically different from the present.
I completely agree. It's not about predicting the future, it's about creating it. And that starts with each of us, with our own curiosity, our own willingness to embrace new ideas, and our own commitment to building a better world.
That's a great call to action. So, to our listener, we leave you with this. As you navigate this complex world, keep your eyes open for those cathedrals in the making, those audacious projects that are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. They might be closer than you think. And who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to build one yourself.
Indeed, the future is not something that happens to us. It's something we create.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into innovation bubbles and the forces shaping our future. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.